Ibrahim, welcome to trunblock.com. I want to start this conversation on the contents of your remarkable book, this book, Future Ready Retail. But asking you first to explain who and why it's dedicated to Six-Pack.
Well, it's got nothing to do with me personally, I can tell you that. Look, the book took me 1 year to write, and it was 1 year of Sundays. And my partner put up with me, or didn't put up with me, because I wasn't around for every Sunday for a year. So my thanks goes to her and her support in this book and her encouragement. But Six-Pack is a family thing. It's basically the name of our group, my wife and I, my two sons and their two partners. And it's dedicated to them, or to us as a group.
That's a really nice thought. Now, the book really encapsulates what you've been speaking about at length now for a number of years. Essentially, it's about reimagining and repurposing retail into places of experiences, of curated, blended locations that become sort of serendipity machines offering inspiration, engagement, sharing, repeat visits, and a true sense of belonging. And there are 4 pillars to this, I understand, which I'm sure you'll get into. Now, I know that the principal focus of the book is shopping centres and the high street, but there are clear parallels that can be drawn with the travel retail business, especially airports. And it's this that I really want to focus on. So let's begin with your assertion that we're living in a world of retail Darwinism and that retail businesses today must make a quantum leap from being just responsive to predictive. What's the background to this?
Well, what used to be a great thing for brands, for retailers, was to find out what customers want and respond to it. And I think that's no longer adequate because our audiences and consumers are changing at such speed, their behaviours, their expectations. They're shopping on platforms now that didn't exist 6 months ago. So if you are an airport, a shopping centre, with thousands of square metres of concrete and glass, or if you're a retailer with 500-600 stores, how can you create an agile business where your business is fundamentally about real estate? And how can you be agile enough to respond to such rapid changes in expectations of that audience? And that's what we mean by retail Darwinism. The speed at which consumers are changing is so fast, businesses can't adapt quick enough. And yes, I suppose I use that term for effect and to be provocative, but by and large, it's true. And that actually isn't only the case in the world of retail. It actually is also the case in the world of work. Look how work has changed. And it's not just because of COVID. COVID has just accelerated it. But some trends that have happened relatively quickly has taken a lot of people by surprise. And therefore, it's very important that businesses create a process, a system, a culture that allows them to predict as much as they can through insight, through data, through trend forecasting and analysis, what is coming. And you're not always going to be right, but if that is within your culture of your business, then you stand a better chance.
Okay, so just walk us through the 4 pillars.
So the 4 pillars of future readiness, as I refer to in the book, are as follows. The first is to reinvent convenience. Convenience is at the core of this expectation. As our audience lead increasingly complex, busy lives, constantly bombarded with notifications. I don't know about you, but I get messages and I can't remember which platform I got the message on. So yes. Therefore, all experiences have got to be imbued with convenience in terms of what our consumers are expecting. And whether that convenience is about speed, it's about seamlessness, it's about simplicity. And at Portland as a business, the most fundamental thing we do when we analyze a brand experience, a retail experience, we track and we map the customer journeys of different customer segments, and we identify each touch point. What is the complexity? And we strip out that complexity, whether that complexity is physical, whether it's digital, or whether it's human, whether it's within the service proposition. And that is the most sort of fundamental part of our role and the projects we work on. How do we strip out complexity? And that's what we mean by reinvent convenience. The second is connecting to community. How we think about brands now, and increasingly this is the case, brands are communities of interest. They respond to communities that are imbued with a culture, embedded in a culture where the brand is connected to that culture. Brands that are not connected to culture will be irrelevant. And I think brands that are connected to culture, that culture drives the content. Understanding that culture drives the content, and that content builds community. And that's what we mean by connection to community. And that's the second pillar. The third pillar is to reimagine place. That place can be a shop, it can be an airport, it can be a shopping centre, it can be indeed a town centre. And what we mean by that, in the context of retail, is we have got to, I think, shift from this place being about transactional retail to being about, as I say, community. And therefore, the way we term that is a shift of rhythm, shifting from a shopping rhythm, where people come for shopping, transaction, to a community rhythm, to come to meet the community of like-mindedness, or indeed the brands that represent that community. Whether that community is about whiskey, or it's about yoga, or it's about food, or it's about skating, and I think the brands that are connected to those communities and the culture within those are the ones that will remain relevant. And of course, if brands are connected to community and culture is an organic, living, breathing thing. It's constantly changing. And if you're going to be connected to culture as a brand, you've got to be agile, and you've got to understand the trends in that culture and respond to them, and therefore be predictive. And that's what we mean by reimagining place, the complexion of place made up with a different mix of experiences, which are not predominantly or exclusively about transactional retail. They can be about lots of experiences, whether it's wellness, whether it's learning, entertainment, leisure, culture. And the fourth pillar of future readiness is repositioning value. What is the new value? I don't mean value as in price, it's value and values,
It's about perception.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is around two things. One is brands that have a bigger purpose, brands that go beyond product, beyond the service. They mean something in people's lives, in the wider world, and they have a stance, and they represent something much bigger than the products they produce and sell. And I think that consumers are increasingly turning to brands that align with their own values, and consumers are, and also employees. If you're a brand and you've got employees, consumers and employees are increasingly becoming more active and activists. They're more political, which is quite interesting. So they have increasingly looking at brands, and they will align with brands that align with their values, but also take a stance. And you can see that happening with Nike, with the Koenigsegg, the campaign there, and Patagonia, and you're seeing that more and more. And it's no coincidence that those brands that have this bigger purpose tend to be doing well, And part of this idea of repositioning value is also how a brand can create experiences. And when I say brand, I mean a brand, a consumer brand, a retailer, an airport. It's all brands. How they create a sense of belonging. This idea of being in a place, being part of an experience, whether that experience is digital or whether it's a physical experience. How do you feel that it is your place? It aligns with your interest. You feel, in flow, we call it sometimes. The psychologists use this term, in flow. How you feel, it's my kind of place with my kind of people. And I think that sense of belonging that a brand can instill, can drive, is really interesting. And that's why I formulated this 4 pillars of future readiness.
I guess that you would argue that travel retail and airports in particular have suffered from what you just would describe as a retail entropy. Everything almost everywhere looks the same. So much Me Tooing in terms of design and product, and overpriced as well, completely losing the USP of what duty-free should really be about. No surprise then that the traveller conversion has halved in the last 10 years. I mean, your book is actually all about placemaking, as you've just said. What should airports be doing right now, in your view, to build incremental income by adopting a completely different approach? How much of what you've just said actually is doable at airports, given the constraints of that particular of that entity? I mean, you detail 5 steps to placemaking. I mean, how many of these would apply to airports, to airlines, or cruise lines for that matter?
So, the key things I think airports need to do, if I kind of have an overarching comment. 1, kick the addiction to transactional retail. And this doesn't apply only to airports, shopping centres and high streets, but airports definitely. And 2, be totally obsessed with delivering a truly authentic spirit of place. And I don't mean the Disneyfication of airports by sticking things on the wall that represent a local city or town. I mean, within the DNA of everything an airport does, to reflect and be imbued with a spirit of its community, its location, its city, its country, its region. Through everything. Through the materiality, through the physicality, through the service proposition, through its digital, through its social, through every sinew of an airport. And that spirit of place, or we sometimes refer to it as a vision, must not only inform the passenger experience, I believe it must also inform the business internally. It's an internal a communication, it's an internal culture. And if that is articulated as a story which is very clear and has a robust evidence of that and data, then it's something which can galvanise a team, galvanise a business, and therefore create a very compelling experience for the customer. So spirit of place, kick the addiction are the 2 overriding things.
That's a big ask.
Big ask. It ain't easy. Yeah.
Now, you see yourself as a futurist, but in fact you and your company, Portland Design, are much more than that and actually execute many of the ideas you've outlined in the book for some of your clients. Can you briefly give us some specific examples of airports or brands that you think are now leading the field?
Brands-wise, it's an obvious one, but it's such a truism, and that's Nike in every respect. So we talk about a brand hitting a sweet spot or a place, and that sweet spot has 4 components, and when they deliver those 4 components, they deliver what you're suggesting, which is that kind of successful brand. And it reflects back to the 4 pillars, framed in a different way. The first element of that sweet spot is what we call fast, delivering seamless absolutely hyper convenient experiences. The second is what we call slow, delivering experiences that are immersive, that are about storytelling, that are about community, that are about are social, are about learning. The third is that we call local, creating an experience, a store, an airport, which really responds to the local audience. And Nike do that incredibly well as a global brand. Starbucks do that increasingly. Lush as a brand does that. Patagonia does that. You know, Rafa, the cycle brand, absolutely is part of local community, although an online first, a digital first brand online, developing great local experiences. Sweaty Betty, Lululemon, I can go on. These are great brands that deliver those three plus one more, which is the fourth one, which is what we call belonging. This idea of creating a community-based brand experience that has a sense of belonging. So yeah, so that is kind of the four. That's the four pillars that really respond to what you said.
What about airports? Who would you nominate?
You know,
the ones that you've worked for are quite good examples, are they not?
Yeah, absolutely. But I wouldn't say that all the airports in their totality are best practice. There's snippets, there's areas of airports that work really well. There's elements of Zurich Airport, which is fantastic. Great bits of Copenhagen Airport. You know, for me, if you want a true spirit of place, when you go to Zurich Airport, you feel the Swissness. You can't put your finger on it, but it cannot be anywhere else. You go to Oslo, Gardermoen Airport, it is Norwegian in its spirit, and I think that's kind of interesting. I think Terminal 2 at Heathrow is really good. Great offer, great food. I think the ambience, the acoustics, the lighting in Zurich is incredible. The quality is incredible.
But you've just done Newark, haven't you?
We've just done Newark, Terminal A. I'm too modest to mention these things.
Well, I'll do it for you.
So we've just done Newark. We're working on a couple of terminals at JFK.
Are they going to reflect what you're talking about?
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah.
So it is the way forward.
Yeah, we've done a lot of work at Vienna and at Keflavik. We're working. We've done Stavanger in Norway, and of course over the years we've done a lot of work in the midfield in Abu Dhabi and Dubai Airport, T3. Over the years we've worked on many airports, and there are elements of those that kind of the kind of thinking shows up.
But it's scratching the surface enough.
Inevitably, you've got the pragmatics of working for businesses. There's a limit to how much they can implement of what is recommended. Maybe some of what we recommend isn't appropriate. You never know. But certainly, by and large, if I had to compare the moves and the progress that has been made in shopping centres against airports, I think shopping centres, again, in specific areas, have progressed incredibly. If you look at what Westfield are doing,
yes,
in some areas, really, really kind of interesting, and particularly some of the more not necessarily shopping centres but retail developments, places like Spitalfields Market, how they've combined ephemeral and permanent retail, how they've combined retail that is independent and international brands, retail that looks out and looks in. So this development is part of the urban grain. It's embedded in community. It's permeable. It's stitched into the streetscape. These are fundamentals. Of course, much more difficult for an airport to do that, but in its essence, an airport, when it's successful, has got to feel part of that community that it sits in. As a visitor, that feels authentic. And it's easy to say, and I know with all the parameters and the challenges of the physicality and the operational parameters of an airport, that's extremely difficult.
Now, traditionally, this industry has prioritized demographic segmentation, but you're suggesting that segmentation should now be interest and behavior based. Why?
Because we're seeing the death of demographics i.e. we're seeing, when I say demographic, I mean demographic segmentation, because we're seeing, let's call them consumers for this, for this example. We're seeing behaviour of consumers going across generations, and I can give you a kind of anecdote from a personal perspective. I'm 61. I have 2 boys, and if you analyse our behaviour from purely a consumer lens, the way we behave as consumers, we kind of shop in the same shops, we kind of eat in the same restaurants, we follow similar brands, we read very similar media, we watch similar films. There's not a lot of difference between us purely from a consumer perspective. And if you take that and compare me with my father, it's a million miles away.
Day and night.
So one generation, and I'm sure this is not just apply, I know it doesn't just apply to me, one generation, the shift. So demographic segmentation is increasingly irrelevant. You've got to segment your audience and respond to their requirements through their interests, behaviours, the way, their attitudes, and through a cultural lens. And I think culture, as I say, is key to the way brands and places must respond.
So this is really then all about segmentation, busting consumer as generations see in their behaviours?
Generally speaking, yes. I mean, I can show you lots of exceptions of that, but I think as a general trend, absolutely. And I'm not the only one saying that. That's nothing new. Mark Zuckerberg said, we've got to shift from a demographic segmentation to interest-based segmentation. That's fundamentally what Facebook is about.
Now, in the book, you've also kind of redefined the 5 Ps and then added a couple more. Can you expand on this?
Yeah, I mean, so when I trained in marketing, which was the third career that I got involved in after aeronautical engineering and industrial design, it was all about the 4 Ps: price, place, promotion, and product. Maybe not in that order. And then, after that, people began to talk about people. What's the 5th P was people. And I added 2 more to, not I, but generally speaking, you can add 2 more to that. And that's planet and purpose. And this idea, going back to what I was saying about purpose brands before anything else have got to have that bigger purpose, being part of its marketing mix or its customer mix. And I think that's kind of critical, and that's why I kind of talked about the 7 Ps.
So are we effectively then moving from marketing communications as such to marketing connections, in your view? And what are the key trends, do you think, that are influencing today's consumer behaviour, and what do retailers in particular and brands need to do to match consumers' new expectations? We know retailers are largely running behind at the moment, but what do you think they can do?
Yeah, marketing communications has got to shift from a one-way monologue where you talk to or worse at your customers to a 2-way dialogue. And the way this is being kind of played out is that increasingly consumers do not want to deal with corporations, and citizens do not want to deal with corporations. They want to increasingly deal with the people in those corporations. They want to engage with the people in those corporations, in those brands. And therefore you're seeing brands...
Making it personal.
You're making it personal. And now we've got the platforms to allow that to happen in scale. And you're seeing brand ambassadors, brand representatives, influencers who work for brands, whether it's on the shop floor or whether it's in a marketing department, having one-to-one engagement with consumers through chat platforms. This idea of shifting from marketing communications to marketing connection is to do with this one-to-one engagement. And of course, what we're seeing increasingly relevant, and that is coming to the fore, are social first brands. Brands that have social engagement at their core. And social media isn't a broadcast channel, it's a dialogue channel. It's a community channel. It can't be just about broadcasting. It cannot be just a media channel. It's something which is imbued in the bloodstream of a brand when they're social first. And this is really, really critical. And social first doesn't just mean having Instagram. Social first means how you engage with your audience through your people. Social media platforms being only one part of that. It's an attitude. Yes. And I think that's what I mean by a shift from marketing communications or marcoms to marcons. A bit of a pithy way of putting it, but it's really important.